who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, I'm retired, but I spent a lot of my life working in radio, various jobs. I was around the Archers, that was quite important. I wrote a lot for radio. I've written over maybe 300 shows for radio. I've directed a lot of shows. I've been heads of various departments. And I was also chair of the Writers' Guild, which is the Writers' Union. Since retiring down here, I spent a year as boss of the museum, chair of the museum, but was a bit fed up with being a boss, so I got out of it again.
Okay, that's brilliant. Second question is, what was it like after leaving Cambridge and going off to India to teach history?
Interesting. Again, it was my first time well away from England. I loved India. I was paid an Indian rate of salary, which worked out at about £20 a month, I think. Yeah. But of course, all found, including 2 servants. So I was able to mix more with my Indian colleagues than with expats. So I was very lucky that John Freeman was High Commissioner, so he was very friendly. I loved India. I'm still very, very nostalgic about it and tend to support India sometimes in football matches and things. I was the last generation probably of Europeans who went out. Even when I was there, Indians were taking over most of the jobs as Europeans retired. So I still knew quite a few Europeans, but the majority of my friends were Indians. India, of course, was a very socialist country. They revered actually a lot more than they revered Churchill. So it was very easygoing, you know. I can remember one occasion one of my students giving me a lift on the back of his motorbike. "Oh, where are you going?" "Oh, I'm just going to my grandpa's house," who turned out to be the vice president. So it was easy, yeah. Yeah, fine. I couldn't have stayed because I think they were basically Indianizing people at the time. But my best friend there, European friend, was Mark Tully, who was as much Indian as anything else.
That's brilliant, thank you. My third question for you is, what was it like for an Englishman who's worked in Bollywood?
Oh, that was amazing. Well, there was a craze for, what should we say, films set in the mysterious West. So, I don't know whether they succeeded or not, but there were films like Night in London, Evening in Paris, Jewel Thief, which is quite a famous film, and I happened to be in Bombay. I was researching the Parsees, but my money didn't turn up. I assumed it had been nicked, so that left me with no money. I had a French girlfriend there, I met. I was living in Sin, in Bombay, in the rain, in French. But anyway, she had a friend called George, who was an extra in Indian films, and couldn't speak English. They just pointed him in the right direction. But I had a suit, so I was really more important. So I played minor villains. I had been shot many times. Indian films take a very long time to make, and I was hoping that they wouldn't come out when I went back to university. Alas, they did come out, and occasionally showings in Delhi were interrupted by my students shouting out, "Hero, hero, hero!" It was interesting. I mean, it was there was only one camera. You had to be pushed around all over the place. But some very spectacular films, and of quite a high standard. And generally speaking, the people who played the villains were nice, and the people who played the heroes were not so nice.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Question 4 is, what was the design process like for the first discotheque in India?
Okay, well, one of my students was a guy called Rajiv Sethi. He was 20 and brilliant. He was asked to design it, and I was called, and he knew me as someone who designed sets. So we designed it between us. It was obviously based on the cellar, really. You know. Rajiv, by the way, has gone ahead and is one of the leading designers in India now. He's designed the terminal at Bombay. It's wonderful in Indian arts and crafts. While he was there, Pierre Cardin came over to India, and Rajiv sort of went up to him, "Hello, sir. You know, I've got some designs." Now, shall we say that Rajiv was quite pretty, and Pierre Cardin was quite an eye for a pretty young man. But, of course, he reluctantly looked at them, looked through them, thought I'd buy the lot. And the Indian government said, "No, you won't, we will." So, in the end, Rajiv came to London. I met him in London, in Paris, of course. He was in Paris. And I remember we went to Liberty's. This is off the line, but quite interesting. And in Liberty's, there was a bundle of scarves. And it turned out they were all his designs, and they hadn't cleared them. So he went to we were both dressed terribly scruffily. And he ordered the boss of Liberty's to come down, told him to phone Pierre Cardin, this 21-year-old. And anyway, so Rajiv was the other designer. And we came up with something quite interesting. In the end, there was a car apparently smashing through the wall, with lights flashing and so on. Very much of the period. Running a discotheque at a time when Sergeant Pepper came out was quite interesting. I was lucky that I knew the head of Australian Airways, what's it called? Forget anyway. And he would always fly me out the top 10. So it was a slightly, mildly corrupt system. But we'd also bribed, when they found we were doing quite nicely, the main hotel in India also built a discotheque, not knowing that we had bribed the commissionaire to send him to us.
That sounds very interesting. Question 5 is, what was it like after working in India for so long, moving back to England and then working for the BBC?
Very strange. I can remember when I was in India, I would sometimes dream that I was back in England and couldn't wait to get back to India. When I came back, I came back overland in a coach that had been used to deliver Australian girls, basically, who'd been in England and on their way home. They then had to get the coaches back to London. So I joined this coach with a load of other sort of hippie-like characters, which the brakes weren't working properly, I remember that. And we paid $2 a day, $2 a day. On one occasion, we nearly went over a cliff in Turkey. And I can remember we all got out very quickly. And the driver, who really was called Blue, said, "Get over here, bugger, get over," because if the coach was destroyed, he would get home. Anyway, so I came back slowly, which was good. And that was nice to have done it gently. And the first thing, of course, I wanted was a pint of beer and fish and chips. But I arrived home at Christmas, which was nice, and I said a fond farewell to all my Indian friends. And lo and behold, within 6 months, most of them in England.
Question 6 is, how long have you lived in Brixham?
Not very long. I've only lived here about 6 or 7 years. My wife's parents were here since the 70s, so I knew Brixham very well. And one of the reasons we chose to retire here was because so much of her family lives around here. I'm very lucky, though, that thanks to the museum and my writing, I've got to know quite a few of the real old Brixham characters, because there's a distinct, not unpleasant, but there's a group of people who are Brixhamites and a group of people who are newcomers, mostly from the Midlands, of course.
Alright. Question 7 is, what would it have been like for the soldiers that manned both Berryhead and 378 barracks during the war?
Berryhead, boring. There's quite a good exhibition at the museum. They were very well fed, by the way. They couldn't make up their mind whether to bring in local militia or outsiders. So there were a lot of drills and just waiting for Napoleon not to come, really. Now, you say 370, that's the battery, is it?
Yeah.
The battery museum. Don't know much about the battery museum. They have their own battery there. But for most of the war, they were manned by the Home Guard, except in the very early period when there was a real threat of invasion. And that would have been quite dramatic, of course.
Yeah. Question 8 would be, how has life changed in Brixham since the end of wartime?
Oh, an awful lot. Brixham was always a holiday place, and after the war there were lots of camps opening up, holiday camps. But nowadays it's more a matter of retired people, like me. I think I admit this. So something like a third of the population of Brixham are over 65. And that's changed. Now the good thing about this is that they're very active. I mean, all our pop groups have got white hair, you know. So there's a lot of and the charity organisations are manned by a lot of these retired people. They certainly don't come here to sit in front of television. A lot of gardening, of course, but this is the main change. The other thing is that it's quite complicated. Before the war, Brixham was dying as a fishing port. We'd relied very heavily on the wooden fishing boats, which I'm sure you know about, and of course they were no longer feasible. Then during the war, 2,000 Belgians arrived here. Obviously they were fishermen who got into their boats when the Germans were entering Belgium and sailed to Brixham. So they brought their fishing boats with them. They even had their own navigation school. They were very popular here, and they taught our fishermen to use diesel boats. So as a result of the Belgian influence, our men after the war bought a lot of second-hand Dutch boats actually, and Brixham revived completely as a fishing port. It's expanded from then on. Technically it is now the richest, it gets the richest catch in England. Not the biggest. Scotland, of course, is something different. But it catches a lot of expensive fish, let's put it that way. So it is, once again, the main fishing port. But the alternative is no longer through Hull or Grimsby. It's places like Newlyn or whatever, you know. But it does mean that it has a life of its own, and allowing for the fact that each fishing boat supports other industries as well. It's nice that we have this mix, which, unlike Paynton and Torquay, doesn't exist there. They're basically retirement or holiday places.
Okay. Question 9 is, how effective were both Berry Head and 378 barracks at spotting incoming planes and stopping them during wartime?
Well, Berry Head, of course, it was mainly designed against Napoleon. The important thing about Berry Head was there was a huge amount of fuel stored up there. So the trick was to disguise things. And it went through the war without being hit. I think, I can't remember the exact figures, but I think each of them brought down about one aeroplane, you know. But they were important in the threat. That was all. We have no idea whether they would have been effective. The Berry Head was basically, there was, I think, one attack gun there. But they would, importantly, they tried to make it clear that nothing was happening there because of these enormous vats of aircraft fuel. And the railway was expanded to take the fuel up inland. It was treated briefly at Berry Head. So, there was also, in the First World War, there was a radio balloon there too. But we don't know how effective the other one would have been. Probably more important was the fact that they were centres for mining. So the sea right along the coast was completely mined.
So, other than the mining operations that were happening there, would you say that they were more built for deterrent purposes than
I would say
defence?
so, yeah, sure. Well, no, in the sense that there was a real worry that let's take them separately. In the Second World War, there was a real worry the Germans would land. The first, the forts of Berryhead, which were designed against Napoleon, were very heavy guns which could have sunk any French ships. So the forts were built to defend them should the French land troops and try and get in that way. They wouldn't have lasted all that. They wouldn't have been able to hold out for that long, but there were plenty of troops to be brought in if they held out for a while. So you really have to think of two different threats. The first one was against Napoleon and against his navy. The second was against Germany, and there was a real belief that we would be invaded. Though, again, to be fair, the Germans abandoned their plans to invade this part of the coast. It was too far away, but we didn't know that.
Okay. Question 10 is, what kind of comforts would the soldiers have had in both of the forts?
Interesting. Well, no problem with the Second World War forts because they lived locally. They were mostly home guard. There were no barracks as such there. The conditions at the other fort were a bit primitive. They were sort of the dormitories weren't particularly warm, and they would have certainly suffered quite a lot, but they were well fed. That was the main thing. And funnily enough, at the end of the war, the Napoleonic Wars, we were busy building a hospital, which is now the hotel, the Berryhead Hotel. But prior to that was Reverend Light's vicarage, because it was just finished in time for the wars to end. But they were building a hospital, because there were quite a few sick soldiers, just as a result of being in a bleak hilltop.
So one question continuing from that one is, you say that they were very well fed. What type of food would they have had?
Basic. I mean, they had a lot of meat, a lot of cheese, and a lot of bread. Very few vegetables.
Okay. Question 11 is, how many casualties would have been sustained to the soldiers who manned Berryhead and 376 barracks?
Well, very few. There would be obviously no deaths as such, so it was only people who got disease, really. Funnily enough, down the coast there was a disaster with one of the batteries, the next battery along, which killed, I think, 3 or 4 home guard people when the shell exploded inside the gun. But really, no. If we're talking about casualties, the interesting thing about that is, many years before, the fleets, don't forget this was a great centre for the fleets to winter in, and they didn't have any hospitals, so the wounded, the diseased, would be put out to local people, and obviously disputes about paying for them and so on. And only with a guy called Anson, Admiral Anson, I think his name was, did he realise that what they needed was fresh food. So in the later Napoleonic Wars, there was a system right along the coast of fast roads whereby fresh food, fresh vegetables, of course, and meat could be got very quickly to the fleets. They were blockading Brest, which was only 120 miles away. They could come here, come back to Brixham, pick up fresh water, fresh food, and amazingly, I think the number of casualties dropped colossally. In the past, sometimes the cruises, the summer cruise, had to be stopped because there were so many sick sailors. Once Anson came in and his changes, then our fleet was vastly more healthy than any in the world, thanks to the Brixham farmers.
That's brilliant. Question 12 is, what kind of weapons would have been the standard issue for the soldiers who manned the forts?
The brown bess musket. and the standard cannons for the. But interestingly, the Home Guard were mainly, again, you need an expert on this, so I'm quoting somebody else. A lot of American rifles. For some reason, there was a shortage of our ones, and so they used American. And also the guns were often First World War guns, the big guns that were re-set up. The Beaufort's gun was, I think, that may have been more modern, but generally speaking, they were slightly out of date on account of we had lost most of our artillery in France.
Okay. Question 13 is, what was Brixham like before the civil wars of 1642 to 1616?
Right, haha, big one. Well, what's Britain like is not a good question, because it was very different. Cornwall, very backward in some ways, very, very loyal to the king. Interestingly enough, Devon, and we tend to forget this, because of its fishing fleet, and we used to go as far as Newfoundland, how you pronounce it. The sailors were very well read, the fishermen. They were also Puritans, in the sense that they were fatalists, because the strict Protestant religion is fatalist. Their reading was almost entirely the Bible. There was a huge hatred of Catholicism. A lot of them would be farmers half the year and fishermen for the rest of the year. They're vastly better informed than you'd expect, they say. There was a petition in just before the Civil War, where the local fishermen were complaining about the corsairs, because this coast was always being raided by people of the Barbary Coast, and that's Algeria, Tunisia, and they'd catch ships on the way back from the fishing and catch the crew, who became slaves there, and the king didn't do anything about it, which is one of the reasons why this area was initially strongly pro-Roundhead. So you've got to think of an area that isn't as backward as you would have imagined. At least quite a high degree of literacy. Again, if you taking the men from Brixham, because Brixham men sailing to Canada had to go from Dartmouth. Brixham Harbour wasn't deep enough, but we know who were the people sailing from Dartmouth on the petition, and everyone could sign their name. Now that was pretty rare, So you have a much more aware working class, if you like, than elsewhere in the country, certainly in Cornwall.
Oh, that's very interesting. Question 15 is about your book, and it is, in your book, chapter 10, you named it Brixham's Big Moment. Why was William III's landing at Brixham so important historically?
Interestingly enough, because he didn't care. That's to say, first of all, it can be quite complicated. He wasn't a king in Holland. He was a stadtholder, which meant he was a kind of president. So he had very limited powers. He had to be elected. So he wasn't used to being a monarch. Secondly, he wasn't really interested in the job of king in this country. What he wanted was the English Navy, or the British Navy, and our army, because there was a great danger that James II would have allied himself with Louis XIV, who was William's great enemy. And back in 1672, I think it was, the French had virtually captured all of Holland, or the United Provinces it was called, and he just about managed to beat them off. So he came here to forestall the alliance, As a result, it's almost as though Parliament got what it wanted from the Civil War. I'm not talking about the strong, the Puritans, the people, the radicals, but the ordinary people of the Civil War, the ordinary people who fought for Parliament, were fighting for their religion, their land, their rights to land, their Parliament, and William gave way on all these issues. He actually admitted that he was there by invitation of Parliament. Now, all the Stuarts maintained they were there by divine right. So, accidentally, almost, it was a major step towards our present constitutional monarchy, and one reason why later, in the time of the revolutions in other countries, we didn't get one because we were already had a system that worked. And I'd say more or less by accident, really.
That's brilliant. Question 16 is, what would it have been like for the residents of Brixham during its Industrial Revolution of 1815 to 1900?
Oh dear. Yes, interesting point. One mustn't exaggerate the extent to which there was the Industrial Revolution here. There were ironworks, coal, a lot of lime, but the main industries remained fishing and fishing boats, of course. You need to bear in mind that Hull's to Hull started with Brixham fishermen going there. 300 people altogether went to Hull and brought their boats with them. So shipbuilding was important, lime burning was important for the agriculture. The ironworks were quite good. No one ever made much money out of the ironworks, actually. The paint also another thing that they tried to bring in. And again, not that much money. So although Brixham was more industrialised than you might think, the main industry, if you see a map, there's a map in my book of 1864, and if you look at Higher Brixham, Brixham's in two halves, it's still all orchards. And down in the harbour, it's mainly fishing and shipbuilding.
Okay, that's great. So what post-war changes were made to Brixham other than the holiday camps?
Okay, well, they say the 50s tended to be a little bit like the 30s, as it were. But in those days, the harbour was still surrounded by ships, chandlers and things like that, sailmakers, what have you, even then. But very quickly, it all changed. The harbour was completely rebuilt for tourists, basically. But of course, also they built the major fishing port. That was more in the 60s and 70s, well, more recently than that, really. Increasingly, I would say, first of all, it became a town for tourism, but more importantly, it became a town for retirement too. As did Paynton and Torquay, but Brixham attracted a different kind of person, I suggest. Fortunately, it is still not dominated by those of us who retired here, but certainly you will hear. I used to say that the Birmingham accent was more common in Brixham than the Devon accent.
Question about the geography of the area, because obviously the geography of the area is quite hilly, and then it gets lower as you go down towards Brixham. How did that affect industry whilst the Industrial Revolution was going on and wartime industry? Not particularly greatly. I mean, it's not. You have to bear in mind our hills here aren't particularly high. I'm not an expert on the geography. I would have said it didn't affect it amazingly. The important thing was communications. And as big, well, first of all, the expansion of the railway during the war, before it shut down, made a big difference. And children would go to school by train. Probably the difference between the lower town, which is called Fish Town sometimes, and the higher town, which is called Cow Town, wrongly, because it should be called Apple Town, because there was more orchards and things at the top. But
That was the only difference. I wouldn't say the geography isn't that dramatic.
Okay, and final question for you is, if you could go back and live through any part of Brixham's history, what part would you choose?
Oh,
and
I don't
why?
know. I don't know. Let me just think about that one. Probably the early 20th century was probably when it was still flourishing as a seaport, when it was still a local place, when it was quite rich. I say yes. I mean, it's a quick guess, really, but yeah, that was probably its most prosperous time. But really now it's still a very pleasant place to be. Very different from the other local towns. Since I have known it, I've known it for nearly 50 years, it's prospered. I can remember when I first started coming here, that one saw it as the seediest of the three towns, whereas now it looks very much like the most prosperous and go ahead town.
Thank you all for watching this interview, and a special thanks to John for letting me come into his home and actually interview him in person. It was an amazing experience and I will definitely be doing more of them again. Also, thank you to all of you for watching. If you did like, please like the video, subscribe and share for more. Thanks for watching.